Yes, we at the library in Abilene, Kansas, denied that we had any tapes for 20-some years in good faith because we didn't have tapes. We had dictabelts. And we thought, a dictabelt is for dictation, as the name implies. That's what that invention was made for. And we indeed had 10 dictabelts that had been shuffled back between our archives and our audiovisual section. Neither of them wanted to take possession of them, and they were in our vault for a while. But eventually, we got those transcribed. In fact, I hand carried them down to the Dictaphone Corporation because the technology, we don't have the machine that can play them anymore. And indeed, they were Oval Office conversations. We had indications that there was indeed, that there had been recordings of the Eisenhower White House in the Oval Office because some of the memos for the record showed extensive direct quotes of meetings, and also there was an occasional parenthetical note saying, the darn machine didn't work, or I couldn't, the president didn't flip the switch until halfway through the meeting, things like that certainly indicated that several dozen conversations had been recorded. But it was a dictabelt, and I think you won't be able to see this, but it's an acetate belt, 12 inches in circumference, 3.5 inches wide, and it's a one-use item that is then transcribed and thrown away. So the reason we have 10 of these in our collection from the White House period, and I think the reason they still exist is that this was a very busy period. It was early 1955, and Quemoy Matsu was going on. The president was involved with the State of the Union address, and I think he also introduced the interstate highway legislation that same 90-day period. And so there was probably not enough time to get them transcribed and into the record. So, and a couple of them were very, very poor quality. And so, ironically, the ones we have are probably some of the poorest. So it's an interesting situation.
Sheldon, was much more comprehensive, was it not, in the Kennedy administration in terms of taping?
Yes, it was. Although, let me say something briefly about why. The simple, short answer is that we don't know. And if you want to really...
Why there was taping.
Why he did it, but I don't think it's that hard to figure out. As a matter of fact, I think I have a piece of circumstantial evidence that proves it. Evelyn Lincoln, his secretary, claimed that he had complained that some people, during the Bay of Pigs discussions in the spring of '61, had said X at meetings, and then after the Bay of Pigs failed, they claimed to have been critical of it, and he was very angry about that. There was also the discussion with the chairman of U.S. Steel, Roger Blau, who Kennedy claimed said he would not raise prices, and then the next day announced that he would raise prices, and Kennedy called him a lying, well, anyway, I won't say it. But anyway, the only problem with those explanations is that he didn't actually do it for another year until June, July of 1962, which is hard. It's kind of interesting. Why did he wait a whole year? But when he did do it, he did it secretly, obviously, and it was a very tightly, closely held secret in the White House, and the decision to do it was not recorded on paper. I mean, there are no memos asking to have this done. He simply asked the Secret Service agent named Robert Bauch to install it, and Robert Bauch did it and maintained it along with another agent named Chester Miller. All that story is all pretty well documented, but once it was in place, he then used it for the remainder of the administration. Now, there is proof, I think, as I hinted before. On October 29th, the day after, '62, the day after Khrushchev agreed to pull the missiles out of Cuba, Kennedy was in the Oval Office alone when Dean Rusk came in. And it is the only case that I know of in which JFK loses his temper and yells at somebody. It's very unusual, very uncharacteristic. And he just blows up at Rusk. I have the transcript, my transcription of it right here, but I won't bother to read it. But basically he says to him, I'm going to tell you this in private. In other words, it's not going to embarrass him in front of other people. And then he says, I was pushing that Turkish thing, the Turkish swap, the missile swap, for over a week, and nothing happened in the State Department. He also suggests in the Defense Department, and he's really mad about it, and Rusk tries to defend himself, and Kennedy says, I don't know what's going on in the State Department. I want to have a direct liaison in the White House set up. You do that with Matt Bundy right now, et cetera, et cetera. But the main thing I wanted to say is that 3 times during that outburst, he refers to notes. He says, I have notes of that conversation. He says it 3 times. Well, this suggests to me the motive for the tapes. He may even have been thinking specifically of the tapes at that moment, although there isn't any indication he certainly had heard them by then. But that's another issue.
Claudia, President Johnson obviously inherited the system. Were there changes made or just an extension of the same system?
Well, he used basically the same system that was used in the Kennedy White House. Although he inherited the system, President Johnson had been recording conversations before he became president. When he was in the Senate, when he was Senate Majority Leader, he would frequently have someone listen on the line and take notes on conversations. And when he became vice president, he installed a recording system that did record conversations, although it was slightly different than the system that was used in the White House. The White House used the dictabelt system. I brought a dictabelt to show. People are always interested in what they look like, and you can see here it fit on a drum, and a needle created a groove in the dictabelt. We have at the library approximately 640 hours of recordings from the presidential period, and we've processed about 75% of those now. President Johnson, the system was not voice activated. A secretary would start the recorder for those recordings that were made in the Oval Office. He would signal the secretary. He would say either at the beginning of the conversation, take this or get this, or he apparently would signal by doing this, and the secretary would see that he wanted the recorder to start running, and she would begin the recorder. He also had a recording system in his bedroom at the White House in the mansion, and either he started that recorder or he had someone do it for him. So we have recordings from both places. He had a recorder at the ranch. We also have recordings from Camp David and from some of his trips. The Signal Corps recorded some of his conversations, so we have quite a variety.
Jim, to take this full circle now, we want to give you full credit for bringing this process to an end, representing President Ford. Tell us a little bit about the end of taping in the White House as we know it.
Well, first, let me just say that President Ford was as shocked as I think everybody else when he heard about the tapes, and he learned about it after Mr. Butterfield had disclosed it. He learned about it from the press. The press, President Ford was in the House of Representatives, minority leader there, and the press came to him and asked for comment. Well, he was astonished. He said, he shook his head in dismay. This was a new phenomenon in Washington. He had never heard of it. Of course, he found out later it had been going on a long time. But he realized that it was something that could not be done. And a year plus later, when he became president, he told Bob Hartman a few hours after he became president, now, I want to make damn certain those tapes are out of here. There's going to be no bugging and so on. And so he told Hartman because Alexander Haig was still there as White House Chief of Staff, but he felt that Haig had been involved in the Nixon tape, so he didn't entirely trust him. So he told Bob Hartman, who was the person he really trusted, to make sure they were out of there. That was on Friday, I believe August 9. And on Monday night, the 12th, 3 days later, he announced to Congress, as part of his statement, his joint session of Congress, there would be no tapes, nothing of that sort in my administration, no eavesdropping, and so on. And apparently, the timing is not absolutely clear on this, but apparently the next day, a holdover from the Nixon administration came to Hartman and said, by the way, I think there's still some tape devices in the Oval Office. So Hartman had one of his associates, Benton Becker, to go check with the technicians, and they did find them. They found 2 still in the desk, and in the president's desk, and 2 in the wall sconces, behind the wall sconces by the fireplace. So Hartman went back and told the president, he said, damn it, I want them out of here now. In my administration, there's going to be no taping, period. And they were taken out, and that was the end of the taping in the White House.
Do you think, Jim, that that would have been the case if, let's say, President Ford had been elected on his own right? You think he'd have felt differently about taping if you could just eliminate Watergate but still put him in the White House?
When I talked with him on the telephone the other day, John, he said that it never would have occurred to him to tape a conversation on one side. He said, I don't know if it's illegal or not, but it's certainly unethical, and it would have been just something I would not have done.
Knowing what I do about President Ford, I'm not surprised to hear that answer. Sheldon, when did you first get interest from the outside world about tapes?
Well, the first opening was, well, of course, the announcement in 1973, the day after Mr. Butterfield's statement, on July 16th, I think it was, or 17th, the day after you made your statement. Dan Fenn, the director of the Kennedy Library, I believe is here today, although I don't see him, made a statement at the temporary Kennedy Library in Waltham saying that the Kennedy Library had all these tapes. A lot of press people came. There was a great deal of interest in it. And then it took another 10 years until 1983 for the first opening. It was just a limited amount of tape, about 30 minutes as I recall, and some transcripts prepared largely by George Bundy, and which are not very accurate, but for all kinds of reasons. But that was the beginning. And then the process took from 83 to February of 97. The last tapes from the missile crisis were open. So from the 13 days were finally open.
Mr. Butterfield, why do you think President Nixon just sort of let the machine run? I mean, do you think he sometimes even forgot about the fact he was taping?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we marveled at his ability to seemingly be oblivious to the tapes. I mean, even I was sitting there uncomfortably sometimes saying, he's not really going to say this, is he? But he did, and I'm sure John Dean can attest to that too. But pertinent to that question about and why they were put in, I wanted to say again that yeah, you could go in the Oval Office when this light was not on, Oval Office, and shout obscenities if you wanted to. But when the light was on, we didn't have to shout our obscenities. And we didn't. Nixon, if you think there was any way of having Nixon hit a button, you didn't know Nixon. I mean, he could not hit a button, and I'm very serious about that. He would not be able to do that, even a toggle switch. So we did have a manual, but truly he couldn't.
Are you suggesting he was mechanically inept?
Yeah, that was the suggestion. I'm surprised.